also get the transcript. All right, we have our transcript on in case anybody wants to follow along there. So tonight we're talking about power outages in the summer and extreme heat that could accompany that. So something that I think is important for all of us to keep in mind as we look at this information is how can we not only prepare ourselves for these scenarios that we're going to talk about, but how can we support our neighbors? And in addition to that, maybe rely on our neighbors to help in some of these cases. So maybe just keep that in the back of your mind. I'll also preface this that I'm not a doctor or a lawyer, so any of the information that we're going to talk about tonight is not to be taken as such as professional, medical, or legal advice. We've sourced this information from a variety of sources, which we do have cited at the end of the presentation, but just wanted to throw that caveat out there that this is just neighbors sharing neighbors with each other. So let me get this started. All right, can anyone confirm if they can see the big view of this PowerPoint presentation?
Yep.
You're fine.
Yeah.
Thank you. Awesome. All right, so in the summertime, we can have summertime power outages. I think several of us that are in the area have experienced winter power outages and all of the special considerations that come along with it being very cold outside. But that same scenario could happen when it's very hot outside. So a couple of main points to consider when the power goes out unexpectedly is we want to make sure we're preventing any carbon monoxide poisoning. So any tools like generators, pressure washers, grill, anything like that should always be used outside of your home. We never want to bring those tools inside. We can also install carbon monoxide detectors throughout the house in battery backups so that we can help detect when any of those dangerous levels are accruing in our house. We also want to check with our local authorities to make sure that our water is safe. I imagine that that information would come from eWeb or any of the other water suppliers in the area if there was a boil order put in place or if there was any damage to any of the water lines. It's not likely to happen in a power outage, but if it is accompanied by an earthquake or maybe a flood that happens, that could be something to consider. In hot weather, we want to make sure that we're staying cool and drinking plenty of fluids to prevent any heat-related illnesses, and we'll talk about those a little bit more tonight. In cold weather, we want to make sure we have lots of layers to keep in our body heat, and then we also want to avoid any downed power lines that might be around town. We don't ever want to drive over those or touch them. We should always assume that they are charged and contact 911 or the non-emergency number for help there. And I do want to add too, if anybody has any questions, this is a very informal presentation. So if anybody has questions or things to add to anything that's on these slides, feel free to interrupt us. And then we will have time at the end for just kind of open discussion, things we can talk about with our neighbors. All right, so food safety during a disaster. We want to make sure we're keeping the refrigerator and the freezer doors closed as much as possible. And there's a little graphic in here. Our food will stay safe in a refrigerator for up to 4 hours without power if you don't open the door. And a full freezer will keep the food safe for about 48 hours without power if you don't open the door. That time does cut about in half if the freezer is only about half full. But really that key is we want to keep the cold in as much as possible. And a preparedness tip that we can do before the disaster is filling some gallon water jugs about 3/4 of the way full and putting them in the freezer uncapped because that water is going to expand when it freezes. So after it freezes, we can then put on the lids and you can keep them in your freezer until the time happens when the power might go out. You can move a couple of them to your fridge and those just act as large ice packs within the fridge and freezer to help extend that length of keeping your food cold a little bit longer. Yeah, Lynn.
But then you have to open up the freezer. Aren't you supposed to keep it shut?
Yeah, it would be a very quick transfer. So if you're able to keep them in your freezer, they would just be able to stay in there. So it would have to be a very quick move to get it into the refrigerator. Good point. Jerry, yeah.
So one of the tricks I've learned is take a small container of water and freeze it and put a coin on top of the frozen water. And then when you're ready to find, you get power back. If you find the coin on the bottom, you shouldn't trust the food. If the coin is still on the top, or maybe just halfway, it's okay to eat that food.
Ah, that's a good tip. So you know if the water melted or not based on where the coin is at. I like that. Good tip, Jerry. Thanks. All right, so after the disaster, so after those 4 hours has passed, or maybe your power has come back on, we want to identify any food that may not be safe to eat. So if the power has been off for more than 4 hours, we want to throw away all of the perishable food in our fridge. So meat, poultry, fish, eggs, any leftovers, anything that has thawed out that was in the freezer, anything that may have come in contact with flood water or storm water, if that power outage is accompanied by that type of disaster, if anything smells weird. Food can still be unsafe, even if it doesn't have a weird odor or look to it. So we just want to make sure we're paying attention to that time clock of when the power goes out. The when in doubt, throw it out is the motto that I was seeing all over the internet. And I will share this presentation as well. Everybody can access this to download it. So there's a bunch of resource links in here if anybody wants those. So safe drinking water. So our water purification systems could go down in the event of an emergency, likely not to happen just in the event of a power outage, but in case it's accompanied with another disaster. If you've been told that your water is contaminated, don't use it to drink, wash your dishes, brush your teeth, use it to prepare food. Don't use it to wash your hands or baby formula. We always want to use bottled, boiled, or treated water for drinking, cooking, and personal hygiene. And we never want to take water from radiators or boilers that are part of your home heating system. I think there are metals that can accumulate in those units, and I don't know that they're easily filtered out.
What about hot water heaters? I'm told that you can use water that's in your hot water tank.
That's a good question. I don't know the specific answer to that, but certainly something we can research. Is anybody else on here? Has you heard about hot water heaters?
I had to unmute. I think they suggest that you run it through a filter, just because you don't know how long it's been sitting in there. But it is another source. I've heard that you can use it, but you just need to run it through a filter.
Okay.
The Washington emergency director that wrote Map Your Neighborhood included water from hot water heaters as a source if they were protected from incoming contamination. The Eugene Water and Electric Board doesn't like to recommend using water out of your water heater. And I'm just kind of guessing maybe it's the fact that they do build up silt in the bottom of them. That would relate to Joel's comment about filtering it. If it's a good practice to drain away that silt anyway, you shut it off and do that periodically. But yeah, if your water heater isn't regularly serviced, I can see that as a problem. But otherwise, it's the water that you drink. So make your own decision based on what you think the condition of the bottom of your water heater is, where the outlet will let out.
Makes sense. Thanks for that input, everybody. Good question, Barbara. All right, so do you have enough water prepared for an emergency? FEMA and a variety of other agencies recommend having 1 gallon per person and per pet per day. And they recommend that you have at least a 3-day supply for everybody in your household. But really, we want to try to store at least a 2-week supply if possible. So 3 days at a minimum, but really the goal would be a 2-week supply. And we have another preparedness tip here to store a bottle of unscented liquid household chlorine bleach, and that can be used to disinfect your water and also for general cleaning and sanitizing. And you want to store that bleach in an area where the average temperature stays around 70 degrees. And because the amount of chlorine in bleach decreases over time, you want to replace that bottle every 6 months to a year so that bleach can break down and not become effective anymore. but that's a common household supply that's easy to store and can be used to disinfect water. There are some tips. So this presentation has a lot of graphics in it that I'm not going to cover every single one out here. We added them just as reference for people. But there's some information out here on how to store your water. You always want to use your sanitized containers and wash them thoroughly with soap and water before you bottle any water. We can add bleach if it's from an untreated source. And we always want to use unscented bleach, never scented bleach or any of the other additives that can be put in there. You can use a medicine dropper, and there's some information on how many drops to add per gallon of water. And tap water is already treated and can be bottled and stored for about 6 months. But you want to try to keep that in a cool, dark location and somewhere that you can access easily in an emergency. You want to replace any bottled or at-home emergency water supply every 6 months or so. We already talked about chlorine does break down, so you want to keep replacing that often. And let's see, next up, we have a couple of tips here on how to filter water in an emergency, how to build a simple filter that you can, they have portable personal water filters for about $20 or so, and that would be something like a life straw that you could keep in your emergency supply where you could drink from almost any water source and it just filters it right in the container. There's also gravity water filter systems and manual hand pump filter systems. There's a lot of them on the market for hiking and backpacking. Those are good to keep in your emergency supply. And those also require no electricity, so you don't have to have the power in order to use those items. If you're going to disinfect your water in an emergency, you can heat it to a rolling boil for 3 minutes to disinfect. But keep in mind, if you're out of power, that's not going to be an option for anybody to use. So you're going to need a backup way to boil that water. So maybe a camping stove and then also a gas supply for that. You do not want to boil water that has been disinfected. If you've added any chemicals to it to disinfect it, if you boil it, those fumes could become harmful. You can also disinfect water by using bleach or water purification tablets. And we want to, yeah, go ahead.
So if tap water is already treated and it's contaminated, you should not boil it because it might have fumes?
I think it's if it's freshly treated, like if you just added bleach to it, and then you don't want to just boil it right after that because it's going to turn that bleach into fumes right in that presence. I would not think that comment applies to the tap water. And there's also a note here that boiling or disinfecting does not actually filter the water. So if there's any particulates out there or any silt that's built up like in the water heater, doing these methods doesn't get rid of those larger particles. So you might want to add an actual filter for particles like a coffee filter, for example, or a paper towel or a fine cloth can be used in a pinch. All right, before we move on from the water, anything, I know we have some other water experts out here, anything that anybody would like to add or questions, clarifications on that?
I got something. At Bimart, you know, like if you have a hot tub or a swimming pool, there's this stuff. It's like kind of a concentrated bleach called pool shock, and you can you know, you're supposed to disinfect your hot tub every 2 weeks or every week or something. But you can use that pool shock, which you can buy kind of in bulk, to disinfect water. And I don't remember exactly the proportion, but the Oregon Health Authority has on their website, they have a description of how you use pool shock to disinfect water, drinking water. But the thing about, and then the other bad thing, and so the thing is it like chlorine bleach, you know, that you have it around our house, that evaporation problem makes it unusable for disinfecting after 6 months or a year. But the pool shock is crystalline, so it doesn't evaporate. It just sits there. So it's stored, you can store it pretty indefinitely, but then on the other hand, if it ever catches on fire, it's really bad. So anyway, it's just it's a way, and it's a pool shock is like a way to disinfect fairly large amounts of water if you ever are in that position.
Another thing you can do, we talked about using like a bottled water gallon jugs. You can also use any food safe plastic that holds up. Like what I do is I use I got this bad habit called soda, and I take soda bottles and I rinse them out and then put water in them, and then I use that water, freeze it, and then I have some available for putting in the refrigerator if it needed to be, or as a way to keep the freezer. But at the same time, if it thaws, I can use it for drinking water. So you just have to rotate it out every once in a while. That's another option too.
Randy, yeah.
Just as far as the priorities, I can't really speculate on, after an earthquake with some flaws in the water pipes, how much risk you're taking if there's possible contamination. But the one thing that we should all not guess about is the safety of surface water in the outdoors, where if you can see it coming out of the spring, you're okay. And this might more pertain to people who live in the mountain areas, but if you got a pond or something, all water around here is contaminated with Giardia. It causes a really serious, or at least all water in the mountains. It wasn't always this way, and somewhere in the last 50 or 70 years, this infection has spread, and so you just cannot drink water fresh from the mountains. Looks great, it has that contamination. And I worked at the hospital, and people would show up with a terrible gastric distress. Rainwater, on the other hand, you'd have to show a good reason why there's any pollution in it. We just don't have enough of the harsh chemical pollution in our atmosphere that you should presume it's not safe. It is, but that's just, put it in perspective. And water from your water heater that you might filter for, you're filtering for a particulate that's not likely to be toxic, as opposed to the Giardia, which really will make you sick.
Thanks, Randy. Yeah, Lynn.
Sounds like we can also drink our hot tub. There's a lot of water in there.
Swimming pool.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of other chemicals in the hot tubs though too. All right. Okay, so moving on to medications. So any medications that require refrigeration, some of them have to be refrigerated in order to keep their strength. And when the power goes out for more than 4 hours, we're going to recommend that you replace all of those refrigerated drugs as soon as possible. And we want to check with our doctors and pharmacists ahead of time to ask how long that medication is going to stay good, or if there's any backup plans that should be put in place if the power does go out. So they should be able to talk to you about the shelf life of any refrigerated medications. And we really want to have that conversation ahead of time. If the power is out, you may not be able to get a hold of a pharmacist or a doctor. The cell phone service may also be out to find out in the midst of it. So we want to ask that ahead of time, along with trying to stock up on our medications. That's always a good reminder. Try to have some extra medications in the background in case of an emergency. All right, so heat-related illnesses. So things that come along with the extreme heat that we're headed into our summer season. So I thought it was important to find out what actually happens to the body as a result of the exposure to extreme heat before we talk about the different illnesses that can happen. And normally the body cools itself by sweating. Sometimes sweating just isn't enough. And there's different factors that could affect a person's ability to cool themselves and to be able to sweat efficiently. When the humidity is high, that sweat doesn't evaporate as quickly, so your body isn't able to release the heat as quickly as it should. And then there's other conditions that can contribute to that, whether it be old age or young age, obesity, fever, dehydration, heart disease, poor circulation, sunburn, certain prescription drugs and alcohol. Those can all impact somebody's ability to cool themselves in an effective manner. And somebody suffers from a heat-related illness when their temperature control system is overloaded and their body temperature rises rapidly. So their body's not able to cool themselves with the normal processes. So some of these heat-related illnesses start to crop up. So in order to identify these heat-related illnesses, I found this little infographic from the CDC. We want to avoid, spot, and treat. And there's a couple of photos here that'll go along with this. So when the temperature is very high, we want to try to stay indoors or in cool areas. If you do have to go outside, make sure you're dressing properly to stay shaded from the sun, and try to take breaks often, especially if you're working outside or doing any heavy labor-intensive tasks. And also know who is at high risk for heat stroke and heat exhaustion. So infants, young children, older adults, any people with chronic medical conditions. This could be you or somebody in your house. It could also be some of your immediate neighbors. My neighbor across the street, I think they're 80 plus and 100 plus. So I know in the event of extreme heat, I need to go over and check on them. Even if they don't ask me to, I need to just go make sure that they're okay. So we want to be aware of the people who are in our immediate surroundings. We want to spot, so we want to know what the signs are of heat stroke and heat exhaustion so that we can take action. So there's a couple of slides that explain this in different formats here. But on the right side, we have heat exhaustion, which is a little bit of the milder case of these two. And that could include symptoms like heavy sweating, paleness, muscle cramps, tiredness, weakness, dizziness, headache, maybe an upset stomach, maybe vomiting, and maybe fainting. But still alert, still conscious, still able to hold a conversation with somebody. When it really becomes concerning and extreme is it could become heat stroke if the body temperature rises above 103 degrees Fahrenheit. You have red, hot, and dry skin, so your skin actually stops sweating. Your pulse becomes rapid and very strong. The headache escalates to a throbbing headache. You could also have dizziness, upset stomach, confusion, or passing out. So a lot of times people will have an altered state of consciousness. They might be really confused as to what's happening and not really know that they're experiencing all of these symptoms. So it's important to look out for the people that we are with. So this slide here just kind of lists the same types of symptoms for heat exhaustion, which again was the less serious of the two. What we're going to do if we happen to see somebody in that scenario is we want to get them moved to a cool place. So let's get them out of the sun, get them out of the heat however we can. Loosen any tight clothes that might be on. If you have a tie or a button-up shirt that's tight, or maybe a collar, try to help loosen some of that, maybe loosen the waistband. Put cool, wet cloths on the body or take a cold bath and sip some water. But we do want to get medical help right away if you start throwing up, if your symptoms get worse, or if your symptoms last for more than 1 hour. And then again, the more extreme version of this would be heat stroke. So that temperature is really escalating. The person could be losing consciousness. Their body kind of stops sweating and things kind of seem like they're shutting down a little bit. You want to call 911 right away. Heat stroke is an urgent medical emergency. Try to move that person to a cooler place. And you can try to use cool cloths or a cool bath to cool their skin down. And with this case, you don't want to give the person anything to drink. Heat stroke can cause altered consciousness. So it could actually be a choking hazard. The person's bodily functions may not be working appropriately. So we understand that giving them something to drink is not the best idea there. And this is kind of just another graphic of those same two things here. So just the comparison between the two. If you notice the person is really starting to become out of it or having some extreme symptoms, definitely call 911 for assistance. And then there are also two other heat-related illnesses that are a little less extreme than the first two, which would be heat cramps. And that could be heavy sweating during intense exercise or muscle pain or spasms if you're out exercising or doing hard labor out in the sun. And how to resolve that, you want to stop physical activity and move to a cool place, drink water or a sports drink to replace the electrolytes, and then wait for those cramps to go away before you continue any physical activity. If anything lasts for longer than 1 hour, or you're on a low sodium diet, or you have heart problems, you want to call maybe 911 or get medical help right away, depending on how severe that is for you. And then the fourth heat-related illness is sunburn. I'm sure everybody on this call has experienced some sunburn at some point in their lives. It's never very pleasant, but it's going to be painful, red and warm skin, potentially some blisters on the skin. And really the resolution there is to stay out of the sun until your sunburn heals. You can use cool cloths or take a cool bath to help cool your skin down, use moisturizing lotion like aloe or some other items designed specifically for sunburn, and then don't ever break the blisters. Before we move on from these, anything that anybody would like to add on these conditions or perspectives? Yeah, Lynn.
On the heat stroke one, I just noticed that it said to spray him with a garden hose. I thought that was hilarious. So I just wanted to go back to that one, this one. Spraying with the garden
hose. Yeah, if you have to be outside.
I thought that was a good one.
Ed.
Yeah, I just like one thing about heat stroke is it's not as your body loses its ability to control your temperature, and so you think somebody's got heat stroke, and if you just pitch them into like a mountain stream, then they'll cool off, right? But the thing is that you can't if you pitch them into a mountain stream, they can get too cold. It's not like frostbite, but they can get too cold, and that can also be a fatal condition. It's like you have to get well from heat stroke before you can adjust your internal temperature.
That makes sense.
Yeah, anyway, so people sometimes do pitch somebody into a mountain stream, and it can turn out badly.
Yeah, and such a drastic change in temperature trying to cool that person. Yeah, so maybe the garden hose isn't the best advice on somebody, but really I think that note did say try these efforts until help arrives. So do what you can to try to get them to a cooler place, but really you want to contact 911 so that some more intense medical help can come. That's a good point though, Ed.
You definitely want to get help as soon as possible.
I'm curious, what do they do when the well-prepared medical team shows up for a person who's fully into heat stroke?
They slowly work on it, I think. I mean, it's not a quick thing. I think you kind of just, put somebody in the shade and like get in the air-conditioned truck, and keep an eye, just take their temperature pretty often.
Kind of like somebody who hasn't eaten for weeks. You don't try to sit them down to a big meal. You kind of work them into
Slowly
it.
push fluids, yeah.
Yeah. And rather than a mountain stream, like a warm bath maybe would be better. Would be good. It's I'm not a doctor. Moderate kind of treatment, I think.
That makes sense. Okay. All right, so some tips for preventing those heat-related illnesses that we just talked about. Really, the three big themes here are to stay cool, stay hydrated, and stay informed. So we want to practice heat safety wherever we are. Heat-related deaths are typically preventable, so we want to protect ourselves and others at job sites, indoors, in vehicles, and in outdoors. So all of these places are places where those heat illnesses could crop up pretty quickly. We're doing heavy activities and all of those things. And a big disclaimer here is that cars get hot fast. So this graphic here shows the outside temperature being about 75 degrees Fahrenheit. After about 10 minutes, the temperature in a car raises to 94 degrees. After about 20 minutes, that raises to 104. And about 30 minutes, it raises to 109. So the temperature in cars can get hot very, very quickly. We never want to leave children or adults or pets in a car alone. Even if the windows are down, it still gets very hot in there. Even if water is provided, that is not enough to keep the person cool. That temperature rising is really going to override any water that you leave for the person. And also don't overlook any children who may have fallen asleep in the back seat. That I think happens a little more often than anybody would like, but always important to check the back seat. Oregon does actually have a Good Samaritan law. As of June 2017, there was a House bill passed to protect children and dogs if they were left in hot cars. We're the 11th state to pass such a law, and that states that anyone, not just law enforcement, can enter a vehicle by force or otherwise to remove an unattended domestic animal without fear of civil or criminal liability. So if you notice an animal or a child in distress in a parked car, you can call 911. And I have called on this before. Typically, they'll ask me a few questions like, do I know where the person is at? Can I go and find that driver? And if that animal or the child is in distress and it's quicker to locate the owner, you might be able to go and do that instead of maybe breaking a window. But if you determine that more life-saving action is necessary, you want to make sure you have reasonable belief that they are in imminent danger. You want to notify law enforcement either before or soon after entering the vehicle. So maybe call 911, let them know what your plan is and the severity of the situation, and then you can enter or call them immediately afterwards. You only want to use the minimum force necessary and then stay with the animal or the person until law enforcement or emergency services arrives. So this law was signed into place to protect Good Samaritans for looking out for people who might be trapped in those hot car situations. But we have to do our due diligence before we just go breaking into somebody's car without any reason to do so. All right, we also want to try to keep our pets inside during the hottest part of the day and make sure they have access to full bowls of cool, fresh water. If you are going to take them out for walks, try to do it early in the morning or late at night when it's cooler. And there's some temperature comparisons here. When the air is about 77, the asphalt can actually get up to about 125 degrees. So a way to check if it's too hot for your pets is to touch your hand on the pavement for 7 seconds. And if it's too hot for your hand to stay on the pavement, then it's too hot for paws to be out there. And if you suspect that your pet's paws have been burned, make sure to contact your vet immediately. All right, so we are staying cool. We're wearing appropriate clothing, which is going to keep us shaded. So light colored clothing and loose clothing is going to help keep us a little bit cooler. We want to try to stay cool indoors and schedule our outdoor activities carefully. Try to pace yourself when you're out there doing outdoor activities. Wear sunscreen if you're able to, and then avoid any hot and heavy meals that can add a lot of just weight and temperature to our bodies during those summer months. So we want to stay away from that. The best type of clothing to wear out in hot weather or a heat wave is really as little clothing as possible when we are at home or out in public, whatever your preferences and laws allow. We want to choose something that's lightweight, light colored, and loose fitting. A big wide brimmed hat will help provide shade on the head and keep the head cool. And we want to make sure we're applying sunscreen appropriately 30 minutes prior to going out and then reapplying, especially if you've been in the water activities. And it was something to note here, which I learned doing this research, is that the sunburn affects your body's ability to cool itself and can cause a loss of bodily fluids. So it puts you at a higher risk of heat exhaustion and heat stroke if you have a bad sunburn, because your skin is already at a heated stage and it has a little extra difficulty cooling. So that was something new that I learned. If air conditioning is not available in your home, which I think is a lot of people in our area, I know it's not standard in a lot of homes out here in Eugene, we can contact our health department or locate an air-conditioned shelter in our area. And I typically see these reported on via the Register Guard and our local public radio stations. I did not find any other source. We have air cooling shelters that do get activated in the summer, just like heating centers that get activated in the winter. I wasn't able to find a good constant list of what those cooling centers are, though. So the only place I could find was Register Guard and public radio stations that were kind of broadcasting those throughout the summer. If you're not able to find a designated cooling center, you can go to the shopping mall or the public library. Even a few hours spent in the air conditioning can help reduce your temperature, especially if it's at the hottest part of the day. You want to try to take cool showers or baths, and don't rely solely on fans to keep you cool. When the temperature is in the high 90s and above, those fans are not really going to do the trick. They're not going to be enough to keep your body temperature down. And we also want to use our stove and oven less during those really extreme heat bouts to keep the temperature in our homes cooler. So this is a graphic on how to keep your house cool without AC. So you can let the cool night air in if you open the windows just before you go to bed, and then close them up in the morning before it starts to get hot. Keep the blinds and curtains closed when the sun is on that side of the house, so that should help keep it a little bit cooler. Use fans to keep the air moving within the house. Do any cooking outside that you're possibly able to, and then sleep low. So if you have a house with multiple levels and you're sleeping upstairs, maybe consider sleeping on the main floor while it's extra hot. All right, we want to stay hydrated by staying away from sugary or alcoholic drinks, which can cause you to lose more bodily fluid than usual. And any very cold drinks can actually cause stomach cramps. So room temperature or medium to cool drinks are really the recommended here. And we want to drink more water than you think you're going to need. Don't wait until you're thirsty, because your body really needs to keep it replenished. And we want to keep our pets hydrated as well. And then stay informed. So we want to check for updates from our local sources about where the cooling centers are and when the extreme heat is going to be coming. We want to know the signs of heat-related illnesses and how to treat them, so we can recognize it not only in ourselves, but in others. Yeah, Jerry.
Can't hear
You're on
you.
mute, Jerry.
Unmute.
Sorry about that. I don't know if you can see this on my screen, but it's an app, and there's one for iPhone and there's one for Android called Heat Index, and most of this information is in this app. It's called Heat Index.
Cool, thank you, Jerry.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'd like to verify if anyone knows whether this is true. Someone once told me that if it's very hot and you're not thirsty, that's a sign of dehydration. I always thought if you were dehydrated, you'd be thirsty, but they said, no, if you stop getting thirsty, you're dehydrated. Is that true?
I think it is. I mean, I think it can be true. Really, if you're in the hot weather, you kind of want to keep sipping away on water. As soon as you get out in the hot weather, pretty soon you want to sip and just sip all day. And as far as if you're, I mean, one thing is if you're urinating, during the day, that's a clue that if you keep urinating, then you're getting enough fluids. And being thirsty is, it can tell you that you're, again, I'm not a doctor, but I believe it can clue you in that you're dehydrated. But I think it's true that you can, I mean, being thirsty can clue you in that you need to drink some water. But after, I think it is possible that you would lose the feeling of being thirsty, and then that's kind of a step on the way to being dehydrated. I think it's something that it's really, I used to drink like a couple of gallons a day of water, and that would be fine. But it just, you can, it's hard. It's really hard to tell, and if you're in trouble. And anyway,
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Yeah, drink before you're thirsty was the guidance that I came up in most of the research, that your body, just because your thirst level doesn't necessarily indicate your hydration level. So it's very possible that not being thirsty could indicate dehydration, but you could also be dehydrated and still be thirsty. Good question, Barbara. Biff, I see your hand up.
Thank you. I wanted to make a comment also about the sports drinks. I drink a lot of Gatorade for medical reasons, and my doctor suggested that I make my own powdered Gatorade because you can dilute it by 50% and still have all the benefits of the electrolyte, but with half the sugar. So I wanted to share that too.
Nice. That's a great tip.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Biff. Misty, I see your hand.
Hi, yes, just a few comments. I participate in a Native American ritual called the sun dance, where you are dancing in the sun without food or water for 3 days and 3 nights. And just from my personal experience, the thirst never goes away. So if that means anything to you guys, definitely there's water, and watermelon was everything on my mind the whole time. And as far as like making your own electrolyte drink, I know that if you get like a high quality Himalayan crystal salt, you can make your own electrolyte drink using Himalayan crystal salt. There's lots of information online on how to do that if you want to make your own. Thank you.
Randy, your hand's up.
Oh, I wanted to just recap the main thing about how our body cools, because I'm not sure everybody has it right there. You want water in our bodies because it's our basic cooling mechanism to have it evaporate from our skin. We might have 10 units of heat in water on our body, but when we get it to evaporate into the air, it takes with it not only 10 units away, but 5 units from our body. So you can actually cool things cooler than the ambient temperature. And so fans really are good. I just saw an interesting thing at a outdoor festival a week ago, 95 degrees the whole time. The fire department had these little buckets and fans that dispersed misted water. It lands on you, and then it's already in such tiny droplets that any slight breeze or anything, and it evaporates, and boy, it really cooled you. So you want to be aware of how much breeze you have. That helps water to evaporate. And the relative humidity of the surroundings is critical for getting water to evaporate off your skin. If it isn't coming to your skin as sweat, a mist on your body will help you utilize that basic physical process. It's called the latent heat of vaporization. And it explains a whole lot of things, how your refrigerator works, and even why some hot racing engines can develop frost on the top of them as they're running full speed, because they are inside vaporizing a particular chemical that has so much latent heat, it cools things off that way. And so it's there's really no substitute for getting, it's better than immersing yourself in water that you think will be cooler than the surrounding, is just to get that water on your skin in a way. Then that's where the clothing, or lack of it, to evaporate, to get the water to evaporate. A mist helps, and the breeze really helps.
Thank you, Randy. That science, the science behind it. I always like the science, the why. So that's really helpful explanation. Appreciate it. All right. So Randy was just mentioning that heat index. So the heat and humidity are measured together to determine what the temperature really feels like outside. So if the temperature is 90 degrees and the humidity is about 80%, then the heat index comes to 113. So even though that means it's only 90 degrees on the thermostat, it actually feels more like 113. You can find there's a full heat index chart. Jerry also mentioned that heat index app that you can get on either phone types. And here's just kind of a preview of what that looks like, the National Weather Service. If you Google heat index, you can find out what that chart looks like. So as the temperature increases and the humidity increases, that increases what the temperature really feels like across the board. So the number on the thermometer is not always the full story of what it feels like outside. All right, so talking through all of that, so what to do in a power outage and what are the different illnesses that can occur. Let's bring it all back to how can we prepare? We're talking about this ahead of the heat, ahead of all of this, so we can figure out what we can do to prepare ourselves and our neighbors to be ready when it does happen or if it does happen. We always want to, and this applies to any emergency, make sure we create an emergency plan with our household, and that includes a disaster supply kit for at least 3 days. We want to shoot for 2 weeks of supplies, but we need to at least have 3 days of supplies. So we need 1 gallon of water per person per day, non-perishable dried canned food. We want flashlights, batteries, weather radio, battery powered extra batteries there. And the battery powered flashlights and lanterns are recommended over candles, gas lanterns, and torches to minimize the risk of fire or fire hazards within the house. We want to have some basic first aid supplies, prescriptions, and over-the-counter medicines like Tylenol, acetaminophen, ibuprofen, all of those things that you might take just for some minor injuries that you might encounter. A digital thermometer so that you can keep track of a person's internal body temperature, extra clothing in case you need to change, board games and cards and fun things to keep yourself entertained if the power is out. You're going to need a way to pass the time. And then if you can, a backup power for cell phones, communications, medical equipment, and any other critical needs. So you need to evaluate your own personal needs and your own household needs and make sure you're including things like that in your supply kit. And some questions to ask yourself and your neighbors and maybe your family members is, do you know how to shut down your gas, electric, and water if necessary? So if the scenario called for it. Are there any people in your household that that have disabilities or illnesses that require any extra assistance? So any life-saving equipment that requires power, any medications that need to be stored in the fridge? It's important to think about that stuff ahead of time. Will you have the capacity to help them? So just because somebody is in your house that has these extra needs, we need to think about if we have the ability and the capacity to help them. Are we prepared ourselves so that we can help that person that's in our life? And do your neighbors have the capacity maybe to help you if you need it? Do you have somebody that you can reach out to or give a call and say, hey, I'm out of this. Can I borrow some supplies? Or I need some help. I need you to come over and help me with something. Do you have people that you can contact? Are there any groups that you might be able to turn to? Maybe churches, coworkers, clubs, any organizations that might be able to help? So questions to ask ourselves. And then we have our sources out here too. So that's it for the presentation portion of this. So we have about 6 minutes left for just kind of open discussion if anybody wants to add anything to this topic or has any ideas on how we can prepare ourselves or our neighbors.
Oh,
Biff, yeah.
What is the overall forecast for the summer? Are we expecting another heat dome this year? Does anyone know?
That is something I did not check. That's a good question. I know last year we faced some pretty extreme heat. We were over hundreds for a couple of days, sporadically here in Eugene and throughout Oregon.
I don't. Oh, sorry,
yeah.
Becky.
Yeah, go ahead, Joel.
I haven't really looked at it real close, but the state meteorologist hasn't been forecasting really warm, hot temperatures this year. So I guess you can look at that. If you look online and go to the state meteorologist site, you can get the quarterly forecasts and it'll tell you what he thinks is going to happen in the next 3 months. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would say, watch out for sudden changes in the weather that people aren't acclimated. I just went south to California, and we've had a pretty mild first part of the year, and they've had, well, it was 95 degrees and the sun was really hot, and even the dirt would burn your feet if you were barefoot. I just found myself rapidly getting in a distressed condition, and fortunately it was okay. I knew these kind of guidelines of drink extra water, make sure your body can sweat and evaporate and cool itself. Watch out for the direct sun. It's drastically more impact than shade, and all those things. It was a challenge to adapt in a couple days to sudden heat. I suppose people who have flown to super hot areas, if you would experience the same, and our neighbors, us and our neighbors, we would be in the same situation if right now we suddenly jumped into 95-degree weather day after day, which is possible. We had it before, and look at the difference between what we've had so far. I mean, it's nice that we've been up to in the 80s, but the rapid change will distress quite a few people. And it's something to keep in mind, not being acclimated.
I just added I found the link and I put it out there in the chat for the forecast. So people can check it out.
Thank you, Joel.
No.
All right, any other thoughts from the group?
I just was gonna type this out, but I might as well just say it. And there's not much we can do about this, but folks that are coming from out of state seeking shelter and a new life because they're escaping extreme weather, and it appears to them that we're hunky-dory over here in the Pacific Northwest. So yeah, just another layer.
Yep. And another layer to this too that really wasn't touched on in the presentation is in Eugene, we obviously have a lot of population that is unhoused and out on the streets during this extreme heat events that we typically have. So being able to recognize the signs of these heat-related illnesses can help those neighbors that we have that are going to be out in these conditions all the time. So if we're able to keep an eye on people who are out on the street that we pass who might be experiencing some of this, we can be some eyes and ears to maybe call and get some medical help just by recognizing the signs that they might be exhibiting because they're out there all the time. All right.
Could I ask Misty a question? Because I see on her Facebook, she is from Mexico, and as she just described, a Native American ceremony where there's a lack of water that would distress a lot of people. Is that an acclimation thing, do you think, or is it genetic? Because I myself noticed as an outfitter for our wildfire crew that the Mexican Americans did not feel necessary to carry as much water out on the hot hikes and work time on the fire line, and they didn't come down with dehydration and everything, and whereas Caucasians seem to. And I still don't know what the answer is. It's just an observation I've had. And what you said about some Native American processes, that it doesn't sound like there was a high casualty rate from those ceremonies. Any ideas why?
Oh, I would say probably it's not too scientific. I'm not going to go too scientific, but I feel like yes, genetics plays a large role in this. Western, Eastern European body types tend to carry more water, like we have like a water retention and carry weight more, so to speak. And so we can like hold heat for longer periods of time in our body and be more susceptible to dehydration, if that makes sense. Yeah, so yes, genetics I feel does play a role. And the sun dance, we go without water or food as like a sacrifice to the earth. Basically, it's like not taking anything from the earth. And of course in so many religions we have like a sacrament where you withhold consuming in order to become more spiritual. So that's more of like where that's going, right? It's like having a spiritual experience by withholding those earthly desires and needs. And so yes, we haven't having anybody die in the Sundance is an extremely rare incident, and it's usually from something else and not due to dehydration and or malnutrition. But yeah, definitely a genetic component there. So if an individual is very overweight, like they are going to get hotter quicker, they're going to need water, they're going to need to stay cool, more so than perhaps another individual has a different amount of weight that their body needs to work to, keep cool.
Awesome. Thank you for that input, Misty. That's helpful. All right, everybody. We are about 3 minutes over, so we're going to end this meeting for tonight. I did post the link to this presentation in the chat, but otherwise, feel free to contact us if you didn't get a copy of it. We can absolutely send it out. And we thank everybody for spending your time with us tonight. Hope you all stay cool this summer.
Thank you.